For almost 200 years, we have been told the same story about the Giza Plateau. 3 pyramids, 1 sphinx, built by 3 generations of a single dynasty, in an order and on a timeline that has been repeated in textbooks so many times it stopped sounding like a theory and started sounding like a fact. But in the last decade, something has changed. Not the monuments themselves, they haven't moved an inch in 4,500 years, but our ability to see through them. Cosmic ray detectors, radar satellites, and decades of patient excavation have started to reveal a plateau riddled with spaces nobody planned for in the official story. Hidden corridors, flooded shafts, a void the size of a passenger jet sitting above one of the most famous rooms on Earth. And, if a controversial 2025 announcement holds up, something enormous underneath the second pyramid itself. None of this proves that Egypt's history is wrong. But it does prove something quieter, and, in its own way, just as important. We have not finished excavating Giza. We've barely started. In 1858, a French Egyptologist digging near the Great Pyramid uncovered a modest limestone slab, less than a meter tall, covered in rows of hieroglyphs. It's now known as the Inventory Stela, and it sits in the Cairo Museum, largely ignored by the crowds that pass it on their way to the golden treasures of Tutankhamun. Its text is mostly a list, an inventory of statues that once stood in a temple to the goddess Isis. But buried in that inventory is a single line that has bothered Egyptologists for more than a century. The inscription claims that when the pharaoh Khufu arrived at Giza, the temple beside the Sphinx was already standing. Not built by him. Found by him. That's a problem, because Khufu is the pharaoh credited with commissioning the Great Pyramid around 2560 BCE, and mainstream chronology treats the Sphinx and its temple as part of the same building program carried out by his family. If the inscription is telling the truth, it means the Sphinx predates the man who is supposed to have inspired it. For decades, most scholars dismissed the stela outright. The style of the carving, the grammar, even specific religious titles used in the text all point to a much later period, roughly 670 BCE, close to 2,000 years after Khufu's reign. The leading theory became that priests running a much later temple invented an ancient pedigree for their sanctuary, essentially forging a connection to Egypt's most famous pharaoh to boost their own prestige. But even the scholar who proved the stone itself was carved late, Gaston Maspero, one of the founders of modern Egyptology, suspected the words might not be. Copying older religious texts onto new stones was standard practice in ancient Egypt, the same way a modern publisher might issue a new printing of an old manuscript. A priest in 670 BCE could easily have been transcribing a story that was already ancient in his own lifetime. What makes the inscription hard to fully dismiss isn't the grand claim about the temple's age. It's the boring administrative detail that follows it. The text describes Khufu inspecting damage near a specific statue and ordering repairs, in the flat, procedural tone of a maintenance log rather than a myth. Forgeries built to inflate a temple's prestige tend to be dramatic. This reads like paperwork. And that tonal mismatch is exactly why some researchers have never been comfortable writing the stela off completely. There's also a pattern that repeats 1,000 years later. The dream stela of Thutmose IV, carved around 1400 BC, tells a very different kind of story. A prince falls asleep in the shadow of the half-buried Sphinx and is promised the throne if he clears the sand away. Once again, the Sphinx isn't described as something newly built. It's described as something ancient, forgotten, and rediscovered. 2 inscriptions, separated by roughly 1,000 years, both frame the monument the same way, not as a creation of their own era, but as an inheritance from one that came before. Inside that same inventory stela is a single word that has quietly divided translators for generations: Rostau. Most Egyptologists render it as the necropolis, or the gate of the dead, a poetic, symbolic name for the domain of the god Osiris, with no literal geography attached. Under this reading, Rostau is theology, not a place you could walk to. But a smaller group of researchers has pushed back on that assumption, arguing that if you set aside centuries of religious tradition and look at the hieroglyphs on their own terms, Rostau reads more literally as the mouth of the passages, an entrance to a network of tunnels. Paired with the ordinary Egyptian word for a physical building, the full title becomes the House of the Lord of the Passages, which sounds a lot less like scripture and a lot more like a location on a map. Whether that translation is correct is still genuinely disputed. But it stopped being a purely academic argument the moment geologists looked at what the Giza Plateau is actually made of. Giza sits on Mokattam Formation limestone, a soft, porous rock that dissolves unevenly over long stretches of time, the same way limestone forms caves and sinkholes anywhere else in the world. Long before anyone started digging with archaeological intent, the bedrock beneath the pyramids already contained a natural maze of cracks, cavities, and channels. The clearest proof that something real is down there sits under the causeway near Khafre's pyramid, the second of the three. Surveyors first noted a vertical shaft cut into the bedrock back in the 1830s. In the 1930s, Egyptian archaeologist Salim Hassan tried to excavate it and ran straight into groundwater his equipment couldn't handle. The shaft sat half-flooded for decades. At one point, it was even used as a drinking water source for workers on the plateau, until falling water tables finally allowed a full excavation in 1999, led by Zahi Hawass. What his team found was not a simple pit. It was 3 descending levels cut nearly 30 meters into solid rock, ending in a chamber that still holds a massive granite sarcophagus sitting in standing water. They named it the Osiris Shaft. Carved into the bedrock of one of the lower chambers is a single hieroglyph, the sign for house. The design is stranger than a typical tomb. Its middle level features a small man-made island surrounded by a moat-like trench, a layout that doesn't show up almost anywhere else at Giza. Symbolically, it echoes the Egyptian creation myth, in which the first mound of dry land rises out of the primordial waters. Whoever built this wasn't just carving a burial chamber. They were recreating a piece of Egyptian cosmology, 3 stories underground, out of solid limestone. And this is where the linguistic argument gets an unexpected boost. In several Old and Middle Kingdom funerary texts, the word rostau shows up next to a verb that specifically means to open, or to pass through, the same verb used for physically opening a door or a gate. That doesn't prove the word refers to a literal tunnel network. But it's a strange word choice for something that's supposed to be purely symbolic. While the Osiris Shaft was being excavated by hand, a very different kind of investigation was happening above ground, one that didn't require digging at all. In 2015, an international team called Scan Pyramids started using muons, subatomic particles created when cosmic rays strike Earth's atmosphere, to look inside the Great Pyramid without touching a single block. Billions of muons rain down on the planet every minute, passing harmlessly through buildings, mountains, and people. But they lose energy differently depending on what they pass through. Dense stone absorbs more of them. Empty space lets more through. By placing detectors inside and around the pyramid and measuring which directions produced unusually high muon counts, the team could effectively X-ray tens of meters of solid limestone. In November 2017, they published their results in the journal Nature. Directly above the Grand Gallery, in a part of the pyramid nobody expected to find anything, sat a previously unknown void at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section similar to the gallery beneath it. They called it the Big Void. Crucially, this wasn't a single instrument producing a fluke reading. 3 separate detector systems, built and operated independently by teams in Japan, France, and Egypt, all identified the exact same hidden space. The same project found a second, smaller corridor behind the chevron blocks on the pyramid's north face, just over 9 meters long. In 2023, engineers threaded a tiny endoscope camera through a gap in the stonework and, for the first time in roughly 4,500 years, recorded footage from inside it. Archaeologists have been careful about what any of this actually means. Muon imaging can tell you a space exists and roughly how big it is. It can't tell you what's inside it, whether it connects to anything else, or why the builders left it there. Some researchers think the Big Void is simply a structural relief space, similar to the known chambers above the King's Chamber that keep the ceiling from collapsing under the weight of the stone above it. Others argue its size and position don't match any known stress relief feature in the pyramid. Nobody has drilled into it and nobody has physically inspected it. For now, it stays exactly what it sounds like, a confirmed, unexplained empty space inside the most studied building on the planet. If the Big Void reopened the conversation about hidden spaces at Giza, a March 2025 announcement lit it on fire. A small team of researchers, Filippo Biondi, Corrado Malenga, and Armando May, live-streamed a presentation to roughly 1,000 viewers claiming they had used a radar-based imaging technique to see beneath Khufu's pyramid, the second-largest structure at Giza. Their claims were specific and enormous. 8 vertical shafts, each surrounded by spiral formations, descending nearly 650 meters into the bedrock. 5 multi-level chamber complexes near the pyramid's base. A tunnel network almost 2 kilometers long, supposedly linking all 3 major pyramids together underground, an entire hidden city beneath the visible one. It's easy to see why this spread so fast. To many people, it sounded like a direct, modern confirmation of that old, disputed word, Rostau, the mouth of the passages. The backlash from the archaeological establishment was immediate. Zahi Hawass, the same archaeologist who had excavated the Osiris shaft decades earlier, stated flatly that the team had never been authorized to conduct fieldwork beneath Khufu's pyramid and had not carried out any physical investigation in Egypt at all. All excavation and testing at Giza requires approval from Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, and no such approval and no such fieldwork had taken place. Radar specialists raised a separate, more technical objection. The imaging method used is well established for detecting shifts near the Earth's surface, but no radar technique has ever been shown to produce detailed architectural images hundreds of meters through solid limestone. To several independent experts, the neat, symmetrical shafts and chambers being shown in renderings looked less like direct observations and more like interpretations layered on top of very limited data. The team's own earlier, peer-reviewed research from 2022 had focused on much smaller, near-surface anomalies close to the Great Pyramid, a far more modest claim than an interconnected underground network stretching for kilometers. And the sequence of events itself became part of the controversy. The findings were shown to the public in a live stream before any peer-reviewed paper existed to back them up, meaning millions of people saw the dramatic renderings weeks before scientists got a chance to evaluate the methodology behind them. So, where does that leave the 2025 claim? Announced, disputed, and unverified. Not confirmed, but not disproven either, because nobody with the authority to test it has been allowed to try. Here's the part that tends to get lost in the noise. None of the genuinely confirmed evidence needs the radar claims to be true. The inventory stela's reference to passages beneath the plateau still exists, whatever you make of the translation. The Osiris shaft, with its artificial island and its single carved hieroglyph for house, is a physical structure anyone can visit, 3 levels down. The Big Void above the Grand Gallery is confirmed independently by 3 separate detection systems using 3 different technologies, published in a peer-reviewed journal. Strip away every disputed claim from 2025, and you're still left with a verified archaeological record showing a plateau riddled with more hidden space than most visitors, or most textbooks, ever mention. Giza isn't the only place where this pattern shows up. At Baalbek in Lebanon, a Roman temple complex sits on a foundation containing limestone blocks weighing an estimated 800 tons each, with no Roman inscription anywhere claiming credit for quarrying or placing them. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, radiocarbon dating puts the oldest carved pillars at roughly 9,600 BC, thousands of years before Stonehenge, built by people who, according to the traditional model, were still hunter-gatherers with no cities, no agriculture, and no business constructing monumental architecture. And at Gunung Padang in Indonesia, a decade of drilling, ground-penetrating radar, and radiocarbon testing led one research team to argue that buried layers beneath the site could be more than 16,000 years old, a claim so far outside the mainstream that the paper was eventually retracted in 2024, leaving the question open rather than closed. None of these sites, on its own, proves the existence of some single lost global civilization. Baalbek may simply reflect engineering skill we've underestimated. Göbekli Tepe may show that complex, organized building happened long before farming did. Gunung Padang remains a genuinely unresolved scientific argument. But taken together, a pattern is hard to ignore. across continents and cultures that never had contact with each other. Later civilizations kept describing the monuments they inherited the same way, not as things they built, but as things they found. The inventory stela is still sitting behind glass in Cairo, mostly ignored. The Osiris shaft still descends into flooded bedrock beneath the causeway. The Big Void is still sitting exactly where 3 independent muon detector systems found it, unexplained and untouched. And somewhere beneath Khafre's pyramid, a claim that could be nothing or could be everything is still waiting for someone with the authority to actually go and check. None of this rewrites Egyptian history by itself. But it's a reminder of something archaeology proves over and over again. What we call settled history is really just the best explanation the current evidence allows, and the evidence isn't finished arriving. The pyramids have outlasted every theory built around them so far. Whether Giza turns out to be the final chapter of one civilization or the surviving doorway into one we haven't found yet is still an open question. And until someone gets permission to look, the plateau is going to keep that answer exactly where it's kept everything else, underneath the sand and out of reach.